Today my special guest is Larry Arata. Hi Larry, how are you?
Thanks for having me, appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're going to be talking about your organization, OCAN, O-C-A-N.
Yes, the Opioid Crisis Action Network. Right.
Opioid Crisis Action Network. Okay, and you are doing a concert benefit.
That's right, yes. On November 17th is a Sunday night at the Ardmore Music Hall. Used to be called the 23 East.
Oh, right,
So
okay.
yeah, I think we all grew up watching music at the 23 East. Probably younger than we should have. But now it's still a music hall, and they get a lot of good acts. And a good friend of mine, George Kilby Jr., has decided to give his time of his band, the Road Dogs, and to help us raise money for people in need. And also a neighbor of mine, John Woodman, is part of a local cover band. They call them a dad band because they're all
I love that.
guys about our age, and they're very popular. And
Are you in this band?
No,
Okay,
no,
okay.
So they're really fun. It's called the Unskunkables. So I grew up with John Woodman and his brothers and sisters, big family on Lawson Avenue, and now he lives across the street from me on Edgewood Avenue in Havertown.
Right.
So we've been neighbors our whole life, and
Wow.
and friends. And so he's also he and his band have also agreed to donate their time to help raise money for this cause. So we really appreciate that and hope everybody can attend.
Excellent, excellent. So can people look you up
Sure.
on Facebook?
Yes, we have a Opioid Crisis Action Network has a Facebook page and also a .com website, the opioidcrisisactionnetwork.com. So you can get the information on those two sites.
And you'll see this flyer too. So when is this? November
17th.
17th.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna go a little deep.
Yeah.
Okay, so who's this?
This is my son Brendan, and this is too. And Brendan died of a heroin overdose on December 9th, 2017. And his struggle for many years before his struggle was drug addiction, his struggle was with depression. And so we hear a lot about opioid pill and opioid addiction leading to heroin addiction, and that was the case with my son. We hear a lot about it through prescription of painkillers.
Right.
Maybe someone gets hurt and they get overprescribed and they get addicted. That was not the case with Brendan, but he was depressed, and he has bipolar disorder, so he would get manic, and if he would go off his meds, and he would crash into suicidal depression.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened several times in his last several years. And so the people that cared for him did their best, but in my unmedical trained opinion, they always stabilized him in a depressed state. And so
That's awful.
yeah, so he and one of his best friends got a hold of opioids from his best friend's father's cabinet. He had back surgery, and so that's how they got addicted to opioids, just through self-medicating. They both suffered depression. They self-medicated through opioids, and then they got addicted when that supply was cut off, and then overly expensive compared to the cheap heroin that's available on the street. They both became addicted to heroin, and they're both gone now.
I'm so sorry.
His friend died. His friend died a couple years before he did, and so when his friend died, then we knew there was no deception, no room for deception there. We said, Brendan, you were always together. Obviously, if he was taking heroin, you're also abusing heroin. So let's get treatment. And he tried very hard to overcome his addiction, and he was in rehab, and he was going to NA meetings, and he was doing well. He was employed. He actually seemed to be happier. And so even though we knew what we were up against, we knew the odds were against us, it was still quite a shock when he died because he was doing so well.
Right.
And he had really given it his best. He was 96 days sober when he suffered his relapse. And it's very common that after someone has been sober for about 90 days or so, that somehow they tend to relapse, and after they've been sober that long, they're susceptible to the strength of what's been being put in heroin these days, and that's what killed Brendan. So yeah, my wife and I have been obviously we're in mourning for.
When did this? How long ago did this happen?
About 20 months ago almost. So December 9th, 2017. So over 72,000 people in America died of an overdose in 2017, and our son was one of them. And of course we're in mourning, but we're trying to mourn with a mission, and that's why we founded the Opioid Crisis Action Network. We put together a platform that promotes best practices for treatment, and by and large it's not being followed, it's not being promoted, it's not people aren't being educated on it, and it's really the infrastructure for best practices is not in place in America. And so we're trying to promote policies that promote best practices treatment for those with substance use disorder. So we've things like, first of all, just before best practices, just figuring out who are good treatment centers. So when we found out our son needed treatment, and if you picture yourself being a parent, how would you find out the best places to take your son or daughter or your loved one, whether brother, sister, husband, wife? So so there's not a lot of regulation out there. It's largely an unregulated industry, and so we want every recovery home, every sober living home to be regulated, and so that people, for example, when my father-in-law needed heart surgery, we could go on a website and figure out every doctor's
That's easy, yeah.
We could find out his survival rate, we could find out infection rates for hospitals, we could find out all kinds of information to decide who the best heart surgeon was for my father-in-law. But that's really not available for treatment centers for those who are suffering from substance abuse disorder. So that's step one, is to make it easier for loved ones to know where the best places to seek treatment are, and what are best practices. And so a lot of places don't support best practices, and so we want more of these recovery homes to support those who are pursuing medication-assisted treatment programs or medication-assisted treatment regimes. So a lot of them, about 80% of them that are out there, don't support that. They just support abstinence-only based recovery. And abstinence only works for some,
right.
But the research, and it's extensive research, shows that you're 3 times, or at least twice, so between twice and 3 times less likely to suffer a relapse if you're on a medication-assisted treatment regime than if you're just in an abstinence-only treatment regime.
Right.
So that's best practices, is medication-assisted treatment. We didn't know that when Brendan was in recovery. I feel guilty. It's one of my sources of guilt that I didn't know that while Brendan was
that is
in recovery.
not right. Don't take on that guilt, really.
Well, it's there, and I'm doing my best, but I'm trying to help others so that they know, so that people are educated. So Brendan told me a story. People who are in substance abuse, some people who suffer from substance abuse disorder, people who are addicted, they suffer from a stigma in our society, and then that portion of society that goes to NA meetings, they often suffer a stigma from their own brothers and sisters in NA meetings.
God. Well, plus the stigma against just depression alone, any kind of mental health, bipolar, oh my God, you might as well be diseased. Maybe it's easier to get treated if you're diseased rather than getting the mental health.
Well, it's true. I mean, we're so good at fixing a heart.
Right.
We're so good. I got an artificial hip 6 years ago. I haven't suffered any pain since. We're very good at that in our society, but we're not really good at mental health treatment. When my son, for example, we were looking for a treatment center. There's a great scarcity of treatment centers that are good at both treating the mental health disorder that the patient might be addressing, like bipolar with my son, and the addiction. So that dual diagnosis, as it's referred to, there's very few sites that can really boast a good recovery for both disorders, or even that they're certified and equipped to address both disorders. So we had a hard time finding as a treatment center that could address both these issues. Excuse me. Getting back to the conversation I had with Brendan when he was in recovery, that's okay, it's both very important issues. So he's in recovery at this point, and he said, I was at the NA meeting last night, and one of my brothers in recovery stood up and said, I've been sober 60 days, and then somebody else who was sitting in attendance said, no, you're not clean because you're on MAT, you're taking Suboxone. So this is a best practice documented by many different scientific studies to be twice or 3 times as likely to reduce the chance of relapse, and yet he's being stigmatized. No, you're not 60 days clean.
By somebody in the program itself.
Right. And
so there's stigma on top of stigma.
So the stigmatized are stigmatizing a subgroup. And so at that point, I didn't know. And Brendan said, Brendan always disliked his medications for his bipolar. And so he said, I don't want to take a drug to get over my drug addiction. And all that seemed to make sense to me at that time. I was uneducated on best practices. I was uneducated on these studies. So I just said, Brendan, you're doing great. Just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And then, he was doing his best he could, but he did suffer a relapse and died of an overdose after being sober 96 days. So that's so educating the public about best practices is something that our group, Opioid Crisis Action Network, is dedicated to doing, and promoting those best practices. The other thing is insurance companies and our government, Medicaid and Medicare, do not cover long-term care for the addicted. So there's a limit on the amount of days in a treatment center. And those in the treatment centers have to really fight tooth and nail every 7 days through a 7-day review process. It was really a waste of
every 7
time.
days?
Every 7 days you have to justify my patient needs another 7 days. So if you were treating me, you would have to say, well, Larry needs another 7 days and justify why for the insurance company to okay the coverage.
That's horrible. I thought at least it would be like 60 days or 90 days or something.
Well, that's what we're fighting for 90 days. It doesn't all have to be in a acute care treatment environment. The average stay now is around 21 to 28 days in that treatment center, and then you have IOP, intensive outpatient. So inpatient averages between 21 days. Some people, though, are pushed out after 14 days. And because after that 7-day review, they say, well, I think this patient's ready for intensive outpatient treatment, moving them out of the inpatient treatment center after 14 to 21 days. So we're happy that is lengthening.
Right.
And insurance companies, Medicaid, Medicare are covering more of an extended at least 21 to 28 days of intensive inpatient care. And then the transition to outpatient is also a time when a lot of people have relapses. So they leave the structure of an inpatient care facility, and now they're maybe back home in the kind of environment that's not as structured. And so the temptation is so great.
Maybe got them where they ended up anyway?
Maybe contributed to they have issues in the home or issues wherever they're living, where they have influence of friends that are not living the way they should be living, and they have the issues that lead to depression that maybe they self-medicate. So you have an intensive outpatient that needs to be transitioned to a structured environment for intensive outpatient. And these sober living homes often are not covered by insurance. Halfway houses are covered, and so we need more of them, though. There's a shortage of certified halfway houses so that people can have the intensive outpatient treatment in a more structured environment. And then after intensive outpatient, there's another transition that these people in recovery really struggle through to, again, do they go home or do they go to a recovery home? And these recovery homes are not, again, covered by insurance or by Medicaid and Medicare. And so it's like...
They're probably not very regulated either, as far as maybe abuse or...
Yeah, some are excellent, and some are first rate, and they receive excellent care, and some are predatory. They're absolutely predatory. And how does a parent or how does a loved one know the difference? Because there's not as much regulation as there needs to be for those homes. But that's on the negative side. There's not as much regulation for them. On the positive side, if they are a good home, if they are certified, if they are following best practices, they provide an invaluable service of structure for sober living that enables transition into back to recovery and back to productive life. So it should be covered. We should have 90 days at least of a continuum of care, whether it's inpatient, outpatient, a recovery home that's covered by private insurance or by Medicaid or Medicare. That's our platform. And over 100 candidates running for office in 2018 endorse our platform.
Excellent.
So we don't endorse candidates, but we send them our platform and say, do you endorse this platform? They say yes or no. And we publicize those candidates from all parties.
Good job.
Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, what have you, that endorse our platform. So again, over 100 candidates endorsed our platform in 2018. The other thing we do is we do these fundraisers once a year.
Mm-hmm. Oh, once a year. All right.
And,
All right.
and the first one was last year out on the anniversary of the first anniversary of Brennan's death. We did a bowling event, and that raised a few $1,000s.
Okay.
And so we wrote a check for $1,000 to someone who was in need, who wanted to go to a recovery home
Oh, good.
in
Good.
Delaware County. And we wrote the check to the recovery home to pay the rent. It was 1 month's rent, basically. Maybe it was a little bit more than 1 month's rent, but it was a $1,000 check to that recovery home on behalf of that patient. And so
Good.
and the other thing we did was there was someone in recovery right in our neighborhood who I've known my whole life. I knew his parents, and he actually comes to our church sometimes. And he was about to lose his home, where he was taking care of a disabled mom, taking care of a disabled brother, and he himself in recovery. So there was a lot of economic stresses on that family. So we wrote checks totaling about $1,800 to help them stay in their house in Havertown, and help with the electric bill. So half of what we do is to promote best practices, and a platform that promotes best practices. And the other thing we do is these fundraisers that goes to people in recovery that can't afford treatment, but they're seeking treatment.
Right.
And so that's why we conduct these fundraisers. So we're hoping that the Ardmore Music Hall would be a great event. It'll be a lot of fun. With
Come on out.
two great musicians.
OCAN is putting this on November 17th.
Yep, at the Ardmore Music Hall, which is a great venue. And George Kilby Jr. is a master of the blues. I've known him since college. We graduated from Princeton together. He's been in the music business his whole adult life, and he's performed all over the world. And he's known as a master of the blues, country rock, southern rock, but he's really a very creative and very fun musician. And the Unskunkables are our local cover band, and they're both a lot of fun, and it should be a terrific night for a really good cause. So I hope you can join us 7 o'clock Sunday night, November 17th at the Ardmore Music Hall.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you so much. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. So we'll have your website up, we'll have the event and everything where people can get tickets. And thank you so much. Thanks for joining us on Living It Up, Making Life Juicy.